Welcome to In-Silico Trials Real Impact, the In-Silico UK podcast that's revolutionizing the way we think about medical innovation. I'm Professor Alejandro Frangi from the University of Manchester, and I'll be your guide through this fascinating world of in-silico technologies. In each episode, we'll dive into cutting-edge research and groundbreaking news that are shaping the future of medical product development and regulation. From computational modeling to simulated clinical trials, we are exploring how digital approaches are transforming healthcare, making it safer, more efficient, more equitable, and incredibly precise. So, whether you're a researcher, regulator, a member of the public, or a patient representative, or simply curious about the future of medicine, tune in as we unravel the complex world of in-silico methods and their real-world impact. Get ready to discover how computer-simulated trials are leading to very real breakthroughs in patient care. In-Silico Trials Real Impact, where algorithms and data are saving lives. Let's begin.
All right, welcome back. Jumping right in, we love to deep dive into in-silico trials. And this time we're going to take a look at how they're being used in the world of shoulder replacements.
Yeah.
Specifically, there's a super interesting study that caught our eye, and it's all about figuring out how to make those humeral stem components in shoulder replacements, the part that goes into the bone, how to make those stay put nice and stable for like the long haul, right?
Yeah, for sure. This study, it's published in the Annals of Biomedical Engineering.
Okay.
It's really down into the weeds, into the nitty-gritty about what actually affects how stable that implant's going to be. And the cool part is they're doing it all virtually, like way before they even think about putting an actual physical implant in a patient.
So basically what we're talking about here is trying to avoid those dreaded revision surgeries.
Right.
Those follow-up surgeries that sometimes happen.
Exactly.
When an implant loosens up and starts causing all sorts of problems.
You got it. That's the big one. Aseptic loosening, where the implant loosens up. Right.
But it's not because of an infection.
Yeah.
And it's a real challenge, a huge challenge in shoulder replacements.
Yeah.
And like you were saying, it leads to pain, it leads to limited mobility, and often the patient ends up needing to go back for another surgery, right?
Yeah.
So that's what makes this study so important. Like, they're really trying to find ways to predict and prevent those issues, those loosening issues, before they even become a problem.
Before they even start, right? That's amazing. So how are they actually going about doing that? What's their approach here?
Well, they started off with this really clever validation step.
Okay.
So imagine like a mini version of reality, what they call a benchtop model.
Okay, so almost like a simplified version of the real thing.
Yeah, exactly. Just to make sure their virtual world, their computer simulations are actually mirroring, the real physics of what's going on.
Gotcha.
So think of it this way. They took a foam block.
Okay.
And that foam block is basically standing in for the bone. Okay, so the foam is like the bone.
Exactly. And then they take the humeral stem, that implant, and they put it in that foam block.
Okay.
And then they apply all these different forces to that stem, like mimicking the stresses and strains it would experience in an actual shoulder.
Oh, okay.
So they're replicating what happens in the body.
I see. But then, how do you go from this foam block experiment to this complex computer simulation? How do you make that leap?
Well, it's all about data, right?
Yeah.
It's about making sure that the virtual world that they're building in the computer actually behaves like the real one.
Right.
So they took all the data from that physical experiment, all those measurements of how the foam block and the implant reacted to those forces, and they used it to build this really sophisticated computer model.
Wow.
It replicated everything.
Mm-hmm.
The foam, the implant, the force, you name it.
That's amazing.
And the cool thing is, with this computer model, they could actually see how the stem moved within the foam, like at a microscopic level, Oh, wow.
All within this controlled virtual environment.
That is so cool. But did they only test it in like a perfectly straight up and down, kind of scenario, or did they?
That's a great question. They actually went a step further.
Oh, wow.
They knew that in real life, surgeries aren't always perfect.
Right. Things don't always go exactly to plan, you know?
Exactly. So they actually introduced little variations into the computer model
Oh, wow.
to mimic those imperfections that can happen in real surgeries, like, slight misalignments in how the implant is placed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So they're accounting for the fact that a surgeon might not place it perfectly every single time.
Exactly. They wanted to make sure their virtual world was as realistic as possible.
That's really smart.
And to really make sure that their virtual world was reflecting reality,
Right.
they compared it to data from a real clinical study.
Oh, okay.
So this clinical study, they had compared two types of humeral stems, two different designs.
Right.
One with a rough grit-blasted surface,
Yeah.
kind of like sandpaper.
And the other one with a porous coating, kind of like a sponge, designed for bone to grow into it.
Ah, okay, so like two very different, like, textures, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
And what did they find when they compared the virtual world and those real-world results from that study? Did the simulation hold up?
The clinical study had shown that the porous-coated stems had less loosening over time.
That makes sense, right? If the bone's actually integrating with the implant, it's getting more stable.
Exactly. And you know what? The computer model predicted that difference perfectly.
Really?
It accurately showed that those porous-coated stems were going to be more stable.
Wow. So this virtual world, this computer simulation, can really give us insights into how different designs are going to perform in a patient.
That's what it's telling us.
That's incredible. It seems like we're getting closer and closer to being able to actually predict how implants are going to behave once they're in the body. Does this mean we could even start to personalize implants, based on someone's individual anatomy?
You're on the right track. This is where the power of In-Silico trials really starts to shine,
Yeah.
They didn't just use one virtual humerus bone. They actually used 18 different virtual humerus models in their study.
Hold on. So they weren't just testing it on, like, one average bone.
Yeah.
They had a whole bunch of different virtual bones to play with.
That's right.
Why'd they do that?
They wanted to represent a whole range of patient anatomies and bone densities.
Okay, I see.
Because people's bones are different.
Yeah, of course.
And they used CT scans to create these virtual bones so they could, give each virtual bone a different density, just like in real life.
Oh, that's fascinating. So they're actually taking into account the fact that some people have denser bones than others.
Exactly. That's a key part of personalized medicine.
Yeah.
You're not just looking at how an implant works in one hypothetical person. You're looking at it in a whole population of virtual patients.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like you're getting a much bigger picture of how this implant's going to behave in the real world, right?
Yeah.
But I'm curious, how did they account for things like friction?
Oh, good point.
Like the friction between the implant and the bone. That seems like it would play a huge role in how stable the implant is, right?
Absolutely. You're right on the money. Friction is key.
Yeah.
And they were really clever about how they incorporated it into their model. They assigned different friction coefficients to the grit-blasted surface and the porous-coated surface.
So they're basically saying, like, okay, this surface is a little bit more sticky, this surface is a little bit less sticky, right?
Precisely. It's about how grippy each surface is.
Gotcha.
And they fine-tuned those friction parameters. They adjusted them.
Okay.
By comparing their model's predictions to what actually happened in those real-world studies.
I see.
Just to make sure that their model was on the right track.
So they're really meticulously making sure that their virtual world, this computer model, is reflecting the real-world physics of how these implants work.
Exactly. It's all about precision and making sure that the virtual world really does mirror reality.
That's just incredible. This is amazing stuff. But what does this mean for the future of shoulder replacements? Especially with all this talk about capturing patient variability, what's the next step here?
It means we're really moving towards this idea of personalized implant design,
Yeah.
where we can actually take all this information, how the surface finish affects things, how the patient's own unique anatomy plays a role,
Right.
and use that to design implants that are going to last longer and work better for each individual patient.
So instead of having this one-size-fits-all approach to shoulder replacements,
Exactly.
we're actually moving towards this world of custom-tailored shoulder replacement.
You got it.
That sounds incredible. That's a game changer for patients, right?
Mm-hmm.
But is it really feasible? How do we actually make that happen?
Well, think about it. We already use imaging like CT scans to get a good look at a patient's individual anatomy, right?
Right, yeah.
And this study shows that we can take that CT scan data,
Yeah.
create these virtual bone models, and then test out different implant designs and positions, all virtually before we even get to the surgery.
So instead of just kind of guessing which implant's going to work best,
right,
we're using data and these simulations to actually predict the optimal fit for each person.
Exactly. Imagine being able to show a patient a simulation of their own shoulder and how different implants would work over time.
That's amazing.
We could actually pick the implant and the surgical approach that's most likely to give them the best outcome years down the road.
Wow, that takes personalized medicine to a whole new level.
Yep.
It's like having a blueprint, a custom-made blueprint for every shoulder replacement. But, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second. Wouldn't that make the whole process way more complex and time-consuming?
Well, it's true that creating these personalized models and running all these simulations does take time, and it requires a lot of computing power.
Yeah.
But, those are challenges that are being tackled really rapidly with all the advances in computer technology and software.
That's true.
And when you weigh those challenges against the potential benefits, it seems like a no-brainer.
I mean, what kind of benefits are we talking about specifically? What's the real impact for patients?
Well, the biggest one, the most important one, is reducing the risk of those revision surgeries.
Right, yeah.
If we can get the right implant in the right patient from the get-go, we can drastically reduce the chances of it loosening up and needing to be replaced.
Right, which means less pain, fewer complications, and patients can get back to their normal lives faster.
Absolutely.
And not to mention, there are some pretty significant cost savings for the healthcare system as a whole, right?
Right, for sure.
Fewer revision surgeries means fewer hospital stays, less rehab, and just overall lower healthcare expenses.
Exactly. It's a win-win. So while there are definitely some hurdles to overcome to make this technology widely available, the potential benefits for patients and the healthcare system are just huge.
Yeah, it's really incredible to think how far we've come from that simple foam block experiment, right?
Right.
This research has really opened our eyes to what's possible with these in-silico trials. But are there any limitations? Are there any things we need to be aware of?
Oh, of course. Like with any new technology, there are always limitations and things to consider. One challenge is data. We need good data.
Right.
To create these really accurate virtual models, we need a ton of high-quality patient data. And collecting that data can be expensive and time-consuming.
And we also need to make sure that these computer models are accurate and reliable.
Right. Absolutely. Validation is key. This study did a really good job of comparing their model to real-world data.
Okay.
But we need to keep doing research, keep refining these models to make sure they're giving us accurate predictions about what's going to happen in a real patient.
So it sounds like we're still kind of in the early stages of figuring out the full potential of this technology.
Yeah, we're still exploring, still learning. And there are other factors, too. Think about the regulatory side of things,
Oh, right.
Convincing those regulatory bodies, like the FDA, to accept in-silico trial data as evidence for approving a new device, that's still a work in progress.
But studies like this one, with that really meticulous validation process,
exactly,
are helping to pave the way for that.
They're showing that it can be done right, that you can get really solid, clinically relevant results from these in-silico trials.
Okay, so it seems like there's still work to be done. But the future of personalized orthopedic care looks really, really promising.
It does.
And I have a feeling that this type of modeling isn't just limited to shoulder replacement.
Oh, absolutely not. The sky's the limit. Think about knee replacements, hip replacements, spinal implants, any area where we're trying to make implants fit better, last longer, and work more effectively could benefit from this approach.
That's amazing. This study has really blown my mind. It's it's opened up this whole new world of possibilities in orthopedic care. But let's shift gears for a second and talk about the bigger picture. What does this research mean for the medical device industry as a whole? What's the most important takeaway here?
For me, it's this shift, this change in how we think about developing medical devices.
Okay.
We're moving away from this reactive approach where we're basically trying to fix problems after they've already happened, and we're moving towards a more proactive approach where we can actually predict and prevent those problems from even starting.
So instead of just fixing broken shoulders, we're trying to keep shoulders healthy and functional for longer.
Exactly.
That's incredible.
And that's what makes this field so exciting. It's not just about being engineers or scientists. It's about being pioneers, being at the forefront of this new era of medicine where we can use technology and data to give people truly personalized and effective care.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener. But before we get too lost in the future, I want to bring it back to the present for a second. We've talked a lot about personalized implants, preventing revision surgeries, all that good stuff. But what about the companies that are actually making these devices?
Okay.
What are the practical implications of this research for them? What should they be taking away from this?
That's a great question. I think the biggest thing is that they need to start incorporating these in-silico trials into how they develop their products.
Okay, so it's not just about creating this, like, cool computer model. It's about actually using it to make better design decisions.
Right. Exactly, to create devices that are going to work better for patients. And, it goes beyond just the design of the implant itself.
Oh, okay.
We can use these in-silico trials to figure out the best surgical techniques, too.
Oh, I see.
We can simulate different ways of doing the surgery and figure out which methods are going to minimize problems like misalignment and make the implant more stable.
So it's almost like giving surgeons a virtual practice arena.
Exactly.
Where they can try out different things and perfect their approach before they even go into the operating room.
Precisely. So if medical device companies really embrace this technology, they can not only make their products better, but they can also be part of this big change that's happening in orthopedic care.
This deep dive has been so insightful. It's really got me thinking. It seems like we're on the verge of this massive transformation in how we approach orthopedic care.
I think so, too.
But before we wrap things up completely, I want to touch on one more thing that we haven't really talked about yet. Regulations.
Okay.
How do you see the whole regulatory landscape evolving as these in-silico trials become more common in medical device development?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? I mean, right now, the gold standard, like the main way we evaluate medical devices is through clinical trials.
Right. Those trials where they actually test the device in real patients.
Exactly. But those trials, they can be super expensive. They take forever.
Yeah.
And you can only include a limited number of patients in them.
Right. And they don't always capture all that patient variability that we've been talking about, all these differences in people's anatomy and bone density and all that.
Yeah.
So where do these in-silico trials fit in? Like, how can they be helpful?
I think we're going to start seeing a shift, towards using both.
Okay.
Like using in-silico trials to kind of supplement and enhance those traditional clinical trials, not necessarily replace them completely.
So instead of just jumping right into testing a new implant in like hundreds of patients,
right,
you could first run all these simulations on like thousands of virtual patients.
Right, exactly.
You could test it on virtual patients with all sorts of different anatomies, different bone densities, like the whole spectrum.
That's the idea. That way, companies could spot potential problems early on.
Oh, okay.
They could tweak their designs.
Right.
And they could pick the most promising designs to actually move forward with clinical trials.
That would make the whole process more efficient, more cost-effective.
Exactly.
And ultimately safer for patients because they're not going to be the first ones to get a device that might have problems.
Right, exactly. It's like using this virtual world to guide and streamline those real-world tests.
That's a great way to put it. But, the big question is, are regulatory bodies like the FDA on board with this?
Right.
Are they willing to accept this virtual patient data as part of, like, the official process for approving a new medical device?
Well, it's definitely a gradual process, but we are seeing some progress. The FDA, they've recognized that in-silico trials have potential.
Okay.
And they've actually released some guidance on how to use them in medical device development.
So they're not, like, completely shutting the door on this technology.
No, not at all.
They're open to it, but they're being cautious, which makes sense.
Exactly. They want to make sure that those virtual trials are done right, that they're rigorous, that the data is reliable.
Right.
And that's where studies like the one we've been talking about today are so important.
Yeah.
They're showing the FDA and other regulatory bodies that, hey, these in-silico trials, when they're done carefully, can produce results that are actually meaningful in the clinic.
So they're building confidence. They're showing that this technology can actually help us make safer and more effective devices for patients.
Exactly.
It sounds like we're at this really exciting point, like we're on the cusp of this major shift. We have the technology, we're starting to see some really promising results.
Yeah.
And regulatory bodies are starting to come around.
Right.
It really feels like we're on the verge of changing how medical devices are developed and tested.
I think so too. It's a really exciting time.
It is. And it's not just about shoulder replacements, it's about like all kinds of medical devices, right?
Absolutely. This approach could revolutionize how we treat all sorts of conditions.
That's incredible. This deep dive has been amazing. It really opened up my mind to all the possibilities. But before we go, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about, something to chew on.
Okay.
This study focused on implant stability. But what other aspects of medical device design could we explore and optimize using these in silico trials?
Oh man, so many things. Like we could look at how different materials affect wear and tear on the implant, how implants interact with the tissues around them, even how the body's own shielding process is affected by the design of the implant.
Wow.
The possibilities are endless. It's like having this virtual lab where we can test out all these different scenarios, find the best solutions, and get those innovations to patients faster than ever before.
It really is a transformative time in medicine.
It is.
Well, thank you so much for being here and for guiding us through all this.
Oh, it's been my pleasure.
To our listeners, keep those minds curious, and we'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive for another exciting exploration into the world of knowledge.